Dan, how are you?
Doing great, Peter. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. Glad to be here talking about Angular U. Can I ask you a couple questions?
Absolutely.
All right. I understand you and John Pappas are speaking right after the keynote from Igor, Brad, and Misko, and will be sharing your views on Angular. Why is this such an exciting time in the Angular space?
Well, there's definitely a lot going on in the Angular space. Angular 1.x continues to move forward, and there's a lot of new releases that are continually coming out there. 1.4's getting really, really close, it looks like. So the big news, though, of course, is where's one after 1.4 and maybe a 1.5 and later. Everybody's asking, what's the story for Angular 2, of course. And so, yeah, I'm really excited by June when Angular U runs. There should be a lot more done on Angular 2. And so it's going to be great to hear directly from the people, actually working on it. I love how sometimes you'll, hear people kind of speculating on various blogs. Well, this is your opportunity, people, to actually hear it from the horse's mouth, if you will, because these are the people actually working on it. So I'm pretty excited about some of the things that they're building in. Performance seems to be really kind of top tier type thing they're working on. And there's a lot else going on as well. So syntax changes are coming in. And so, yeah, there are going to be some big changes, I think, but I like the reason they're doing it. And that's because, well, the web is changing. So it's just how it works.
Sure is. So it seems to me like we're at a convergence of web standards, web components, a new version of JavaScript, ECMAScript 6, a big release of Angular. How are these things all related?
Yeah, and that's really why Angular 2 is going to be, somewhat of a big change from Angular 1. Angular 1 is over 5 years old now, if you go back to when they first started it. And things like you just mentioned, web components, well, that wasn't even around at all. ECMAScript 6 wasn't even thought of yet. We were still worried about moving from ECMAScript 3 to 5 way back then. And so you're right, there's a big convergence going on. And really what it is number one, from a language perspective, we're now getting a lot more robust language features. So Angular kind of had a choice with 1.x. Do we stick with the kind of status quo, or do we go ahead and jump on these new standards that are coming out? And that's what they're deciding to do. I heard a great quote about it from someone. In fact, I think his name's Bradley, but I can't remember the last name. Anyway, he made a quote that Angular 2 seems to literally just be building on top of web standards. And I would agree, because ECMAScript 6 is going to add new functionality for the language. Web components now allows us to build, in essence, our own tags. So instead of using like a jQuery plugin to add a grid or an Angular directive even, we could build a component, which Angular 2 is going to support. And that component then would just be a tag I could give to you and say, hey, Peter, I want you to use my grid. And you would just put, Dan's grid or whatever, and you're off and running. So it's definitely an exciting time. I always joke that if you're someone who doesn't like change, you're probably in the wrong business. Because as we know, just since we've been talking, probably 3 or 4 new libraries came out. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's true. And one of them is probably called Broccoli. I keep hearing about that one.
Yeah, there's all kinds of.
So we only have a few minutes left. And I was kind of wondering if you'd give us a preview of what you think is going to be talked about the Monday morning of Angular. Kind of let us know how that might affect people's Angular development if they're working on Angular teams, and how that could change things.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that if you're using Angular heavily now, you want to know what's the migration story going to be. And I think one of the things that they'll have a little more clarification on by June is, hey, how are we going to migrate from Angular 1x apps to whatever Angular 2 ends up being? So I'm sure they'll go over some of those features. There's some new features when it comes to data binding, and I'm pretty sure, having met with them fairly recently, that they'll be talking about that. Some of that's still being worked on, so it's kind of hard for me to speculate exactly what they'll cover there. But one of the questions people have is, what's the story on things like two-way data binding versus one-way data binding? And so I'm sure they're going to address those types of things, because that's kind of really heavy on people's mind. And then they also, I suspect, will go into, how does ES6 and TypeScript fit into this? And it's going to be cool because, as you know, being involved with it directly, in addition to their keynote, We're also going to have the keynote from the PM from the TypeScript team, who's Jonathan Turner. And so it's going to be really cool to have the experts from those, two areas involved with giving the keynotes. And they've been meeting a lot lately, so I suspect we'll also see a lot about the integration there and how that's going to work.
Well, sounds really interesting. We're looking forward to hearing you talk right after the keynote, and I'm sure you and John will give us some great insights into what they actually said.
We'll hope so.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
We have a lot of cool stuff we're planning.
All right. Great chatting with you.
Well, thanks for having me.